Following the collapse of the Roman Empire and the schism between the West and East, the invasion of barbarian peoples, and the change of peoples in Europe caused by the Great Migration, the once regarded golden age of progress, stability, and might was in shambles. Health and hygiene perhaps suffered the heaviest blows, as the aqueducts providing clean waters toward the cities were either destroyed or irreparably broken, and those who knew how to maintain them were dead. Bathhouses that provided the rest and relaxation of hot water and steamed rooms had either been contaminated beyond the possibility of being cleaned out, or they were claimed and used by nobility and the religious caste. People in the Middle Ages acquired something of a bad reputation when it comes to cleanliness, especially the peasantry. However, despite the general lack of running water and other modern amenities, there were common expectations of personal hygiene, such as regularly washing from a basin, especially the hands before and after eating, which was regarded as good etiquette in a period when cutlery was still a rarity for most people. The better off had the possibility of more frequent baths, and castles, manors, monasteries, and cities offered their residents better toilets with better drainage, and sometimes even had running water using the ancient combination of cisterns and gravity. Naturally, standards of hygiene varied over time and place, and even, of course, between individuals, just as today. What follows examines the general habits and expectations regarding hygiene in medieval hygiene isn't as grim as movies and quasi-documentaries would have us believe. While Europe suffered greatly from a lack of health and hygiene, it became a primary concern of many groups following the outbreaks of the plague and other virulent diseases that ravaged the populations. They lacked sophistication, but this shift in focus certainly helped the population's recovery after the devastation it had previously suffered from. Water was available in villages from nearby springs, rivers, lakes, wells, and cisterns. Indeed, most settlements had developed where they had precisely because of the proximity of a reliable water source. Castles might be situated for the same reason and were provided with additional water from masonry-lined wells sunk into their interior courtyards, sometimes accessible from within the castle keep for extra security when under attack. Of over 420 castles surveyed in the United Kingdom, 80% were provided with a well in their interiors, and 1/4 had 2 or more. The shaft of the well could be extremely deep. The one at Beeston Castle in England measures 124 meters. Some castles, such as the one at Rochester in England, even could draw up water from the well at every level of the keep using a system of buckets and ropes which ran inside the walls. Cisterns collected rainwater or natural ground seepage, and sometimes a castle might have a system of lead, wooden or ceramic pipes which carried water from a cistern to other, lower parts of the castle like the keep or kitchens, as at Chester Castle in England. Another system of supplementary water collection was to have pipes on the roofing to drain rainwater into a cistern. Finally, settling tanks were sometimes employed to improve the quality of the water by allowing sediment to settle before the cleaner water was drained off. Many monasteries would also have had some or all of these features. As towns grew in number and size across Europe from the 11th century CE onwards, so hygiene became more and more of a daily challenge. Fortunately, many of the larger towns tended to be situated near rivers or coastlines in order to facilitate trade, so the supply of water and the disposal of waste was less problematic in these places. Canals, water conduits, wells, and fountains provided fresh water to the urban populace. These were maintained by town councils, who also imposed sanitary measures on local businesses and the population in general. For example, there was often an obligation to clean the portion of the street directly in front of one's house or shop. Towns and cities might have public baths. Nuremberg, which seems to have been one of the cleanest towns in Europe thanks to its enlightened council, had 14 of them. Local authorities also undertook such emergency measures as removing the dead during times of plague. Vikings were reported to have the best practices of personal hygiene in the early Middle Ages, as they cared greatly for their visage and how they presented themselves to the world. Most notable was the near-daily bathing they did in the cold waters of fjords and rivers. They used combs made out of ivory or ornate wood carving and practiced braiding their hair for prestige and ranking. In the Middle Ages, the peasants were reliant on water provided by wells that dotted the landscape. They practiced cleaning their hands before eating and washing themselves a couple of times per week, or more often if the need arose to rid themselves of smell. The daily practice of bathing and personal hygiene had spared the Kingdom of Poland from the outbreak of plagues that had been seen in Europe. The Knights Templar also brought soap from their conquest in the Middle East that was made out of the salt of fatty acids and brought upon an era of hygiene that helped the lower classes and peasantry prevent diseases from spreading. Yet the usage of soap itself was practiced before in Europe, well known in the usage of cleaning the animals they hunted and sacrificed. Only the bones and inedible parts of the animals were offered to the gods. Anything else was used by the people in ancient Greece, Rome, and later on were made by guilds of craftsmen and women in the medieval ages. Yet unlike previous wide usages in antiquity, it was produced for the nobility and religious caste in medieval ages. As running water was very rare, and considering it took such a physical effort to get one bucketful from a well or nearby water source, it is perhaps not surprising that taking a full bath every day was not a feasible option for most people. Indeed, with baths seen as a luxury given the cost of fuel to heat the water, monks, for example, were typically prohibited from taking more than 2 or 3 baths in a year. For those who had a bath, it most often took the form of a wooden half-barrel or tub. Even then it would not have been filled very much, but most of the bathing was done using a jug of heated water poured over the body rather than full immersion. A lord might have a padded bath for extra comfort, and he usually traveled with one, such as the uncertainty of finding convenience on one's travels. The vast majority of people, though, would have made do with a quick swill using a basin of cold water. As 80% of the population did physically demanding jobs working the land, it is likely that washing of some kind was done on a daily basis. Medieval peasants have long been the butt of jokes regarding hygiene, which goes back to medieval clerical tracts which often described them as little more than brutish animals. However, it was common practice for just about everyone to wash their hands and faces in the morning. An early wash was also desirable because fleas and lice were a common problem. Rarely changed straw bedding was a particular paradise for vermin, even if some preventative measures were taken, such as mixing herbs and flowers like basil, chamomile, lavender, and mint into the straw. As most people ate meals without knives, forks, or spoons, it was also a common convention to wash their hands before and after eating. Soap was sometimes used, and hair was washed using an alkaline solution such as the one obtained from mixing lime and salt. Teeth were cleaned using twigs and small pieces of wool cloth. Shaving was either not done at all or once a week unless one was a monk, in which case one was shaved daily by a brother. As medieval mirrors were still not very large or clear, it was easier for most people to visit the local barber when required. The ordinary peasant was probably more concerned with getting rid of the day's grime when they washed, but for an aristocrat, there were a few more details to be attended to in order to gain favor in polite society. Social occasions like meals, when one might get up close and personal with one's peers, warranted particular attention to hygiene, and there were even rules of etiquette produced as helpful guides for the unimaginative diner, as here from the less countenanced table. Monks had their own special areas for washing, including at Cluny Abbey in France, which had a lavabo or large basin where hands were washed before meals. We know from records that they had towels, which were changed twice a week while the water was changed only once a week. The Great Hall of a castle or manor typically had a similar large basin for visitors to wash their hands. In summary, then, it is safe to say that the common presentation in modern films and books of filthy medieval peasants who regarded washing as some form of torture is perhaps not quite accurate, and people of all classes did keep themselves as clean as their circumstances permitted. Nevertheless, it is also true that when medieval Europeans, even those of the higher classes, made contact with other cultures such as the Byzantines or the Muslims during the Crusades, the Europeans often came off second best in the hygiene stakes. Dental hygiene in the Middle Ages was practiced by using pastes made by crushing herbs and mixing them with water in a mortar and pestle. The application of cleaning with a piece of cloth was the most used way of cleaning the teeth and ridding themselves of the pungent odor in the oral cavity. The lower classes used herbs like chamomile and lavender, whilst the nobility were noted for being taken care of by dentists for their troubles. Yet even with the practice of cleaning their teeth and ridding themselves of the smell in their mouths, their teeth eventually rotted, and the only way to have them removed was without anesthetics, and was done in a rather grotesque fashion, either by biting down a piece of wood specifically made for teeth removal, or worse, in the case of the majority of people, by punching or having them dug out with fingers, a general term used to describe a room in a castle or in a house. Garderobes were used to store valuables and be used as a privy. The common folk was dressed in clothes made from fabrics such as cotton, wool, fur, and leather. Worn according to the climate and weather, it provided them with the insulation and warmth needed to survive and go about their daily lives. They were rough around the edges, yet colorful and pleasant on the eyes, and as time went on they improved. Garderobes soon paved the way for fashion to be common to everyone. Prior to this, the same clothes had been used regularly by the lower classes, worn out and tattered, yet mended and replaced when they could afford it. They were washed in the nearby rivers or in wooded buckets made for washing clothes with water, mixed with crushed herbs to rid them of filth and smell and prevent diseases. Despite this routine, it was still not enough to keep them being able to be used long term. The nobility used clothes made from silk and furs of exotic nature. Fabulous and colorful, they were a sight to be seen. Ironically, despite the great care the clothing was given by the servants of the nobility, diseases would often still reside on the clothes and could be passed on to the successors of the garment as the dormant virus was brought to life by the warmth given by the people wearing them. Toilets or privies were usually septic holes for the poor, buckets if one could afford them, or entire wooden or stone rooms with a toilet-like seat for the wealthy. Plumbing was either non-existent, or simply didn't do its job properly. As garbage and waste amounted in time, it was either buried away from towns and villages or simply thrown in the rivers and ocean. This practice gave rise to new and deadlier diseases that were spread in the bodies of those that drank from the water or as a result due to farms being established unknowingly over waste sites. In villages or on manor estates, the peasantry used a cesspit for their own waste, which might then be taken and spread on the fields as a fertilizer. In some cases, a small hut provided some privacy and a wooden bench with a hole in it some comfort. Chamber pots were used at night and then emptied into the cesspit. Without toilet paper or really paper of any kind, people had to make do with a handful of hay, grass, straw, or moss. The toilets in a castle, also known as privies or latrines, were much the same as everywhere else, although the waste was channeled down a hole into a cesspit at the foot of the castle walls or into the moat itself, an added defensive feature not much talked about in military history. Sometimes there were two toilets next to each other and these might empty into a channel that was regularly flushed with water from a diverted stream. The same arrangement was common in monasteries where toilets were clustered together. There were 45 such cubicles at Cluny Abbey, which also boasted a bathhouse with 12 tubs. Castles might also have triangular-shaped urinals, especially in the tower of the circuit walls. In towns, the well-off had their privy in a backyard or even in the house itself with a channel or chute to drain off waste into the yard. Where the poorer classes lived in greater concentrations, households often shared a single outside toilet or several toilets with their waste leading to a communal cesspit. Lined with stone, the cesspits also received any other household rubbish and were regularly emptied by a professional laborer dedicated to that specific and an enviable job. There were regulations prohibiting the tipping of waste into the street, but these were often ignored, and a spell of heavy rain or, even worse, floods, could cause havoc with the town's sanitation system and contaminate the water supply. With towns also packed with horses and donkeys, and farm animals being transported elsewhere or to the butchers, the streets were usually filthy, and this combined with the ever-present rats, mice, and other vermin meant that urban centers became the ideal breeding grounds for disease. Houses used by the lower classes had at first no flooring. Substitutes for dirt were either rush or straw, mixed with herbs to mask the odor of the waste created when it was laid on the ground. With the outbreak of the plagues, wooden flooring replaced the usage of these materials and provided people with an easier way to keep a tidy living space. Those that could allow it decorated their floors with animal hides and fur, carpets made with cloth or wool, and made their houses in such a way that it provided the warmth feeling of home. The nobility had prevented the appearance and spreading of diseases, as their floors were usually made from clay, stone, or marble, which gave them the prideful and classic look of antiquity. Strewn across their flooring were animal hides made from the exotic animals hunted from afar. In addition, bough carpets were also made of silk from the Silk Road, and as time went on, the classic look associated with long red and purple carpets became synonymous with the monarchies that ruled over Europe. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more videos.